Picture this. A stormy night in March, rain pounding down so hard it feels like the sky's trying to drown the world. I'm driving home late, alone on a back road, when my headlights catch something, a stretch of water swallowing the pavement ahead. I stop, curse my luck, and that's when it happens. A car creeps up behind me, silent as a ghost, no lights, no warning. Then the doors start opening, and suddenly, I'm not alone anymore. What unfolds next still haunts me, and if you stick around, you'll see why. I just finished a late shift at the warehouse around 1 a.m., my eyes gritty from staring at security monitors all night. My gig as a guard had me bouncing between hours, sometimes days, sometimes graveyard shifts like this one. The storm had been brewing all evening, and by the time I hit the road, it was a full-on deluge. Water sloshed along the curbs, and the main roads were deserted, so I stuck to my usual route, quiet side streets that cut through the outskirts of town. Big mistake, but I didn't realize it yet. The rain drummed against my windshield, wipers slashing back and forth, barely keeping up. I was maybe 10 minutes in when the road dipped ahead, and my headlights glinted off a sheet of water stretching across the pavement. It looked deep, too deep to risk in my beat-up sedan. I groaned, already dreading the long detour back. Shifting into reverse, I started to back up for a turn when my car let out a shrill beep, the proximity sensor screaming. I slammed the brakes, confused, and twisted around to look out the rear window. There it was, another car, parked just feet from my bumper, dark and still. No headlights, no movement, just sitting there like it had materialized out of the rain. My pulse kicked up a notch. I'd been alone on this road the whole drive, not a single soul in sight. And now this? I sat there, hands tight on the wheel, waiting for them to move or flash their lights, something. Nothing happened. The rain ticked against my roof, the only sound besides my own breathing. After a minute, I tapped my horn a couple times, hoping they'd get the hint. Still nothing. Then their driver's door swung open. A figure stepped out, tall, dressed in black, a hood pulled low over their face. They trudged through the downpour toward my window and knocked, a slow, deliberate rap against the glass. I didn't roll it down. No way. They knocked again, harder this time, water streaming off their sleeve, but they didn't say a word, just stood there, a shadow in the storm. My gut churned. This wasn't right. Who stands out in a flood like that? Silent, knocking on a stranger's car. I shifted into drive, easing forward a bit, careful not to hit the water ahead. The guy moved with me, staying right by my window, his hand brushing the glass. I tried to stay calm, maybe he was drunk, lost, harmless. That's what I told myself. Then came the second knock from the passenger side. My head whipped around, and there was another one. Same dark clothes, same hooded face, staring in at me. Behind him, through the rain-streaked window, a third shape loomed closer, cutting through the dark. My breath caught. 3 of them, boxing me in, and I hadn't even seen them coming. The car beeped again as I jerked the wheel, panic taking over. I floored it, swinging wide to turn around, praying I wouldn't slide into the flood. For a heart-stopping second, the tires spun, losing grip, and I thought I was done, but they caught, and I lurched forward, scraping past the edge of the water. The figures didn't chase me, just stood there, watching as I peeled away. I didn't stop until I hit the main road, hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone and called the cops. I spilled everything to the dispatcher, flooded road, mystery car, 3 guys in black. They told me to wait somewhere safe, so I pulled into a 24-hour diner a few miles up, watching the parking lot like a hawk until a patrol car finally rolled out to check the scene. When they got back to me, they said the car was still there, parked right by the flood, but the men were gone. No tracks, no sign of them, just an abandoned sedan with no plates. They traced it later, stolen from a dealership halfway across the state months ago. My name's Marcus, by the way. I've been working security for a while now, used to late nights and empty lots, but nothing like that. It was a Tuesday, just another shift, until it wasn't. The cops couldn't figure out what those guys were after. Robbery? Something worse? They didn't take anything. Didn't even try to stop me from leaving. Maybe I got lucky, or maybe they were waiting for me to make a different move. I don't know, and not knowing eats at me. I keep replaying it in my head. The car appearing out of nowhere, those slow knocks, the way they closed in without a sound. What if I'd rolled down the window? What if I'd gotten stuck in that water? The cops said they'd keep an eye out, but they never found those guys. No reports matched up, no witnesses, just me and my story. I've switched to the main road since then, even if it takes longer. Storms make me twitchy now, especially at night. Sometimes, when I'm driving late and the rain starts up, I catch myself checking my mirrors more than I should. I'll see a shadow in the corner of my eye and tense up, waiting for that beep, that knock. It's stupid. I know they're not out there, not every time, but it sticks with you. That night, I was inches from something bad, and I can't shake the feeling I only saw the edge of it. Whatever they wanted, they're still out there, and I'm still here, wondering how close I came. I just clocked out from an overnight shift at the convenience store about an hour ago, dragging myself home through sheets of rain. It was mid-March, and a rare storm had barreled into our sleepy town, turning the streets into rivers. Thunder growled in the distance as I settled into my usual spot behind the counter at the quick stop, where I'd picked up some extra hours. Normally, I worked afternoons, but my buddy Jake called in sick, and the overtime pay was too good to pass up. So there I was, 10 p.m. to 8 a.m., staring out at a deserted parking lot as the rain hammered down. The place was dead. No customers, no cars, just me and the flickering fluorescent lights. I figured the storm was keeping everyone indoors, which suited me fine. About an hour into my shift, I decided to get ahead of the weather. The wind was picking up, rattling the pumps outside, so I threw on my jacket and dashed out to secure anything loose. Trash cans, stray crates, a couple of gas cans. I hauled them inside, running back and forth through the downpour. On my last trip, something caught my eye, a guy standing across the street, just beyond the glow of the store's lights. He was pacing back and forth, soaked to the bone, hands shoved deep in his pockets. No umbrella, no hood, just standing there, getting drenched. I squinted through the rain, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he was waiting for a ride, I thought, though it seemed odd out here in the middle of nowhere. Shrugging it off, I finished up and ducked back inside, shaking the water off my sleeves. 2 hours later, the storm kicked into high gear. Thunder boomed closer now, and the wind slammed against the building, making the walls shudder. I'd never seen it this bad. Once, the front doors flew open so hard I thought they'd rip off their hinges. I bolted over, wrestling them shut, and sliding the deadbolt into place. The noise was deafening, rain pounding the roof, wind howling through every crack. Feeling exposed with all those windows, I grabbed my coffee and retreated to the back storage room, figuring I'd ride it out there. The shelves back there were stacked with boxes of chips and soda, and it felt safer, tucked away from the chaos outside. I leaned against the wall, sipping my drink, listening to the storm rage. Maybe half an hour passed. I wasn't keeping track when a new sound cut through the roar. It was faint at first, muffled by the wind, but it came again, a steady, insistent banging. I stepped out of the storage room, peering down the aisle toward the front. There he was, the same guy from earlier, hammering on the glass doors with his fists, staring right at me. My stomach dropped, but I hurried over, thinking he might be hurt or stranded. I fumbled with the lock and yanked the door open just enough for him to slip inside, then slammed it shut behind him. Water streamed off him, pooling on the tile floor. His jacket clung to him like a second skin, dripping everywhere, but he didn't say a word. No thanks, no explanation. He just started pacing again, back and forth across the store, his boots squeaking with every step. I stood there, dumbfounded, watching him. It was the guy from the street, no question, same build, same restless energy. Had he been out there this whole time? 2 hours in that mess. "Hey man, you okay?" I called out, keeping my voice steady. "Need me to call someone?" He didn't answer, didn't even look at me, just kept moving, his eyes fixed on nothing. Up close, he looked rough, unshaven, pale, with this hollow stare that sent a chill down my spine. I tried again, asking if he was hurt, but he ignored me, pacing like a caged animal. After a minute of this, I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. Something was seriously off. I edged toward the counter, where the phone sat next to the register. Maybe it was time to call the cops. But as I reached for it, his head snapped toward me, eyes locking onto mine. That's when I saw his hands, knuckles raw, bloody, like he'd been pounding on something a lot harder than my door. I froze, caught staring, and when I met his gaze again, there was fire in it. "Don't," he barked, low and sharp. My hand hovered over the receiver, then dropped. No point in pushing my luck. He went back to pacing, and I stood there, pinned by the counter, watching him stalk the floor. The storm outside was a monster now, shaking the walls, rattling the windows. It felt like the whole world was closing in, and here I was, trapped with this guy. My mind raced, weighing my options. Run? I'd have to unlock the door and make it through the storm. Not happening. Call anyway. Risky if he snapped. So I did the dumbest thing possible. Nothing. Just stood there, heart pounding, waiting to see what he'd do. It dragged on like that for what felt like forever. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe more. He didn't speak, didn't stop, just kept wearing a path into the floor. I kept my eyes on him, ready to bolt if he so much as twitched wrong. Then, out of nowhere, he paused, turned to me, gave me this long, unreadable look, like he was sizing me up one last time. Before I could react, he marched to the door, slid the bolt back, and stepped out into the storm without a word. The doors swung shut behind him, and he vanished into the dark. I lunged for the phone and dialed 911, spilling the whole story to the dispatcher. The storm must have slowed them down, because it took over 30 minutes for a patrol car to roll up. By then, the guy was long gone. No trace, no footprints, nothing but the wet streaks he'd left on my floor. The cop took my statement, asked about the bloody hands, but they didn't find him. I locked up tight after they left, counting the minutes until my shift ended. My name's Ryan, by the way. I've been at the Quick Stop for a couple years now, mostly quiet shifts, until that night. The next day, when the storm finally cleared, I heard something on the radio that made my blood run cold. A woman from the next town over hadn't come home after leaving her office late the night before. Around 11 p.m., cops were looking into it, calling her missing. I couldn't help but do the math. That guy's knuckles, torn up and bloody. The timing. Was it connected? I don't know. I told the police what I'd heard, but they didn't have enough to go on. No one ever found that guy, and the woman's case went cold. Still, I can't shake it. Every time a storm rolls in, I'm back there, watching him pace, hearing that banging on the door, wondering what the hell I let into my store that night. Some shifts, when it's quiet and the wind picks up, I catch myself glancing at the glass, half expecting to see him staring back. I'd just gotten home from a long shift at the diner about an hour earlier, ready to hunker down for the night. It was one of those rare evenings in mid-March when a storm rolled into our quiet little town, thunder rumbling in the distance, rain pelting the windows. Storms like this didn't hit often, so they always put me on edge. I was sprawled out on my bed, flipping through channels on the TV, trying to drown out the howling wind outside. The house felt alive with every creak and groan, but I chalked it up to the weather. That is, until I heard something odd, a faint thud from downstairs. At first, I brushed it off. Old houses make noises, right? Still, a nagging unease tugged at me, so I dragged myself off the bed, grabbed my flashlight, and shuffled down the stairs to check it out. The living room was dark, the kitchen silent. Nothing seemed out of place. I filled my water glass from the sink, muttering to myself about being paranoid, and trudged back upstairs. Settling back into my pillows, I figured that was that. But only a few minutes passed before another sound cut through the storm. A sharp, unmistakable crash I knew all too well. It was the old brass lamp in my living room. That rickety thing had a habit of toppling over if I so much as brushed it with my hip while passing by. I'd gotten used to its wobbly base, but it had never fallen on its own before. Frowning, I hauled myself up again and headed downstairs, my bare feet cold against the hardwood. Sure enough, there it was. The lamp sprawled across the rug like it had been flung there. I bent down to pick it up, the cool metal heavy in my hands, but something gnawed at me. The storm wasn't wild enough to shake the house that hard. No way it could have knocked this over. I scanned the room, half expecting to see something move in the shadows, but it was just me and the flickering light from the TV upstairs. I set the lamp back on its table, double-checked the locks on the front door, and poked around the downstairs rooms. Everything looked normal. Too normal, maybe. My gut twisted, whispering that I wasn't alone, but I shook it off. What else could I do? I climbed back to my room, turned the TV volume down low, and sat there, straining to hear anything over the rain. For a while, it was just the storm. No creaks, no thuds, just the steady drumming of water against the roof. I started to relax, convincing myself I'd overreacted. Then, maybe 45 minutes later, something shifted. The rain sounded louder. Not just outside, but closer, like it was seeping through the walls. I couldn't pin it down, but it felt wrong, unnatural. My heart picked up as I cracked open my bedroom door and listened. There it was again, sharper now, a wet, rhythmic slapping echoing up from downstairs. I grabbed my flashlight again and crept down the steps, following the noise. It grew clearer with every step, leading me past the living room, down the narrow hall toward the kitchen. At the end of that hall was a cramped storage closet I barely ever touched. I hadn't been in there since last fall, but the sound was unmistakable now. Rain pouring in from behind that door. My chest tightened as I reached for the knob. The door creaked open, and I froze. The tiny window in the closet, one I hadn't touched in months, was wide open. Rainwater gushed in, soaking the cardboard boxes stacked beneath it, pooling on the floor. The wind whipped the curtains aside, and the smell of wet earth hit me hard. I knew I hadn't left that window open. No chance in hell. My hands shook as I slammed it shut, cutting off the rain's roar, and turned to face the rest of my house. The silence that followed was worse, thick, suffocating, like the air itself was holding its breath. I realized then I'd left my phone upstairs on the bed. My options flashed through my mind. Bolt up to grab it and call for help, or just run out into the storm and get the hell away. Fear clawed at me, muddling my thoughts. I edged into the kitchen, snagging my car keys from the counter as quietly as I could. Every step toward the front door felt like wading through mud, my ears straining for any hint of movement. I was halfway there when it happened, a sudden, frantic pounding of footsteps overhead, racing down the upstairs hallway. They were fast, heavy, heading straight for the stairs. Panic surged through me, and I sprinted for the door, fumbling with the lock as the footsteps thundered closer. I didn't look back, just yanked the door open and bolted into the rain, the cold soaking me instantly. My car was parked right out front, and I threw myself inside, jamming the key into the ignition. As I peeled out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of the stairs through the open door. Empty, but I swore I heard something crash behind me. I didn't stop to check. My hands trembled as I synced my phone to the car and dialed 911, my voice shaky as I rattled off what happened. The operator told me to stay calm and find somewhere safe, so I drove to a gas station a few miles away and waited, watching the rain streak down my windshield. When the cops finally showed up at my house, they found nothing, no one hiding, no signs of a break-in beyond that open window. They figured whoever it was must have slipped out when I did. Looking closer, they pointed out something I hadn't noticed. The closet wall with the window ran right along the living room, where the lamp sat on its little table. Their theory was that someone had been prying at the window, and the vibrations knocked the lamp over. Probably hid upstairs after I checked the noise the first time. waiting for me to settle down or fall asleep. For what? To rob me? Hurt me? I didn't know, and the cops couldn't say either. No fingerprints, no tracks, just an empty house and a story that sounded crazy even to me. My name's Ellie, by the way. I was working at a diner back then, pulling late shifts to cover rent. That night started so normal, just another rainy evening after a long day. I'd gotten home around 9 p.m., planning to crash early since I had to be back at work the next afternoon. But after that mess, normal felt like a distant memory. Even now, months later, I can't shake it. I'll be sitting in my room, watching TV or reading, and out of nowhere, I'll feel it, that prickling sense of being watched. I've triple-checked every lock, every window, but it doesn't help. The worst part? Knowing they were right there, steps away from me, while I sat clueless on my bed. I keep replaying it. The lamp crashing, the rain pouring in, those footsteps pounding above me. What if I hadn't heard the window? What if I'd gone to sleep? I try not to dwell on it, but some nights, when the wind picks up and the house creaks, I'm back there, alone, listening, wondering if I really am.